Everyone should go to therapy. I only date people that have gone to therapy. Who hurt you? Get therapy. You perhaps heard sentiments like this, and today we're going to talk about why therapy isn't for everyone, and that for some it can even be harmful. So it should be avoided rather than embraced. Let's start. So this has never made a lot of sense. It's sort of like saying everyone should get surgery. Well, for what? You're going to spend all this time and effort to get cut open without any knowledge of an issue within your body. You just want to have the doctor rummage around inside you in the hopes that they find something that can pull out that will make you a better person. That sounds kind of dangerous and an unnecessary risk for potentially zero gain, actually negative gain, because a doctor could make a mistake and harm something that was healthy that didn't need to be interfered with. We can look at therapy the same way. Some people, they have this attitude that, well, what harm can it do? I'll have this wise, smart person just rummage around in my brain and see if there's anything wrong. Now, that may be, some therapists may be willing to do that, but if there isn't anything there, they're going to quickly, if they're honest, quickly tell you, look, I don't see anything particularly wrong here, or issues you have. You seem to be doing fine. But again, there's this idea that somehow it's useful to have someone just interrogate your mind and your ideas, etc. The danger in doing that, though, is that it can foster a kind of neuroticism that wasn't there before. You could have been content, and then I ask you all these questions, or I prod at little parts of your life that you didn't have an issue with, and now suddenly you're questioning your entire life or a relationship that formerly you had no issues with. And maybe I don't think there's any issue either. But because you've invited me to have a look, to do some analysis, maybe I pull on a thread that in some way destabilizes you. So, as with all things, there's a risk-reward, there's trade-offs here. And okay, if you think there's nothing wrong with you, or no issues you have, and you're just curious, and you want to roll the dice, you can do that. But it can be harmful, potentially, if you don't actually have a complaint. Sometimes this actually happens, this is maybe an adjacent topic, but sometimes this happens where people will be pressured to do it by someone else, like their spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, parent. And they may not feel there's a whole lot wrong with them, but just to appease this other person, they'll do it. That's another scenario in which that's not the best starting point. Because, as I've said before, ideally this process is a voluntary one that is chosen by you, directed by you, not driven by someone else's preferences. So if you come in that context, then if I'm not careful, I can end up enabling a pattern of behavior that exists elsewhere in your life, which is that you appease people, even if you disagree with them. Why do you do that? Now that is a legitimate avenue to go down in terms of a therapeutic exploration. There may be something there that we can actually get to that actually benefits you and that you value. But that wasn't maybe the original intent, and may disappoint the person that pushed you into it in the first place. All right. But to go back to this first scenario where we're potentially just producing harm for no need. I think there's actually some data on this, perhaps with students or in schools, etc., where they just assume that, well, everyone could benefit from some therapy or counseling or psychoeducation, however you want to define it. And again, it can end up making people unnecessarily, needlessly neurotic and ruminating on things that previously they weren't thinking about. But now you've poked at them, and now suddenly they're reevaluating how they see the world. All right. So there's a place for that. Go take a philosophy course or something, or read in your own time if that's interesting to you. But to pursue therapy in this way, without having identified something, it's worth being cautious about this. Just as with regular doctors, our first intent is to do no harm. Now, when we do therapy with someone that has a legitimate complaint, it can involve upset, discomfort, etc. And that can be the price of getting to something meaningful. So it's not that we can always avoid this entirely, but it's motivated by this higher desire to address what has been identified as the issue. Okay, so one other thing here is that on the other side of these statements I was making at the beginning that people make, I wouldn't date someone that does therapy, this kind of thing. The implication there then is that if someone hasn't done therapy, somehow they're incomplete, that they're immature in some way, they're not as developed as they otherwise would be if they're to do this. This again is hard to take seriously. The idea that the only route to some actualized state or mature understanding of oneself is the therapeutic process. As a therapist, it sounds very arrogant to say, pretty self-interested to say, that this is the only means of achieving some ideal. There are plenty of ways to learn more about yourself. Therapy is just one means. Not all of you need it. For some of you, all you need to do is read some books by some of the wisest people on earth that you can access for free. That's all you need. Others, perhaps you just need a coach, someone that can instruct you and hold you accountable in a specific domain of life. Others, if you're religious, perhaps all you need is some spiritual or moral instruction from a priest or other religious director of conscience. So therapists, they don't have this monopoly on self-understanding, self-knowledge. Right? And that therapy has its own little niche for a specific kind of person. And I've gone into the details of how we distinguish those in other videos you can have a look at. But hopefully that has put you at ease that if you haven't done therapy, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to, if you feel like your life's going well. And hopefully you don't need to feel bullied or pressured into doing it by these kind of sentiments that everyone should do it, or I wouldn't date someone if they don't. That's this just blanket generalization that doesn't seem very helpful. Okay, keep it short and sweet. Until next time.